Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Our second pandemic holiday season is fast approaching. Because supply chains and consumer behavior have changed fundamentally in the last 20 months, predicting the outcome of major retail events like holidays is becoming increasingly difficult for retail marketers. Join me in discussion with Jason Furlano, SVP of Commercial at MIQ, a programmatic media partner for marketers and agencies. Together, Jason and I unpack MIQ's latest study entitled The Pandemic Effect, What Holiday Shopping Will Look Like in 2021. We break down the study's major findings, talk about key takeaways for retailers and marketers as the holiday season approaches. Stick around for our conversation about broader shifts in the marketing space. We cover the latest marketing innovations, breaking down the marketing silos, and more.
We are seeing some nuances within the Canadian market, and there was a lot that got kind of uncovered. But I think, to base it down to three key learnings that were uncovered in the report. I think the first was, for me at least, Michael, the gap between online and offline is shrinking.
Let's listen in now. Jason, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm very well, Michael. Thank you for having me on the podcast this morning.
Well, it's my pleasure. We were talking off mic here in wonderful Eastern Canada, where the population is blooming, and it's a wonderful place to be, yeah?
Halifax, Nova Scotia is a tremendous place this time of year, and definitely enjoying the food and weather headed into the fall season.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, listen, thanks for joining me. You've got a great background. The study you and your shop put out, really interesting stuff. And let's just jump right in. First of all, tell us about who you are, your background, and your role at MIQ.
Well, as we've alluded to, my name is Jason Furlano. I'm the SVP of Commercial at MIQ here in Canada, which means I oversee our key relationships with external partners as well as the local marketing department. Now, prior to joining MIQ, I led programmatic sales at a little outfit that you may have heard of, Yahoo, which was then acquired by Verizon and has since, in the last couple weeks, become Yahoo again. And made that move about 5 years ago when I started to see the trend in the digital media space, moving from transactional digital executions to something a little bit more led with like insights with regards to media activation. Mm-hmm. And that's really our focus at MIQ, Michael. Now,
you said $1 million word there, programmatic. So I'm familiar with it, but my audience is made up of a mix of folks, some who may not be steeped in the world of what the heck that means. So in 30 seconds or less, or a couple of minutes, tell me what programmatic is.
I'm going to aim for the 30 seconds or less route on this one. Programmatic media is the auction-based process of placing a digital advertisement in front of a particular consumer. So everything that you're buying or seeing online with regards to advertisements is placed there in a real-time bidding process. And we place those ads for our advertising partners.
So we're talking display ads, and what happens is we're talking in the millions of ads being served. So basically, as I understand it, programmatic kind of says, who is that person that I'm serving an ad to, and what's the best ad to serve them at the best time? And it's all done by machines, right? Like it's a lot of programming because there's just literally millions of these things done, right?
Yeah, you've got it. There's a lot that goes into that to the algorithm that decides what ad needs to go in front of what user, whether it is their browsing behaviors, content that they had been looking at historically, interests, all the way down to the postal code in which they live. All of that is kind of taken into account before that ad is placed in front of a particular person.
And this bidding process always fascinated me because it basically what to pay when. So it's not exactly the topic of our discussion today, but I wanted to make sure everybody had some kind of framework for programmatic. And if you want to dive in, I'm sure you can connect with you and you guys can spend a couple of hours explaining all that algorithm fun stuff. Yeah, right on. But anyway, it works. It's pretty revolutionary, right? I mean, in the past 5 years, it's pretty much revolutionized what you do for a living kind of thing, right?
The advertising space, it's kind of crazy, Michael. Like, what's happened, especially like we say last 5 years, I'll say last 18 months.
Wow.
The innovation that's been required for, what was historically considered like traditional media channels to be moved into the programmatic space has just been really expedited as a result of the pandemic. And now we're seeing, like we just talked about, like digital assets, those banners or videos that we were talking about
Yep.
But now you transact audio ads. So historically, where it was just placed through terrestrial radio or out-of-home ads, now in the digital out-of-home space, even TV ads moving from linear television into the connected TV space are all really happening at like kind of warp speed and are going to continue to progress pretty drastically over the next couple of years.
No, it's interesting. I think we could do a whole podcast on the acceleration of different things, e-commerce, and just that so many people changing their habits. But we're actually going to touch on a bit of that in your report. Now, before we get too far ahead of ourselves, tell us about MIQ. Again, anybody who's a retail marketer would know of you and know what you do, but give us a sense of who MIQ is, scope, scale, and all that great stuff.
Okay. I'll give you a quick synopsis, and I'll do a little bit of the scope and scale, and then I'll finish it off. The easiest way for me to ever tell someone what we do, Michael, is by giving a bit of an example, and I'll give one in the retail space in particular. So MIQ is a digital media partner. We specialize in providing insights, analytics, and solutions for marketers. Those solutions are really customized based on the particular client's core business objectives or challenges, which in the case of most retailers we know, Michael, is converting sales or raising awareness through digital advertising.
Yeah.
We're a lot less focused on media KPIs or those key performance indicators of click-through rates and completion rates. Those are kind of table stakes. We're a lot more focused on like the tangible outputs that we apply to everything that we do. Simply put, everything that we do as a business helps our partners increase their businesses or their scale and helps them sell more things, if I can baseline it down to one thing. And then scope and scale. Here in Canada, we've got offices here in lovely Halifax, where I am today. We're HQ'd out of Toronto, but we've also got representation in Vancouver and Montreal. Mm-hmm. And then globally, London, LA, Sydney, New York, all the big places you'd expect us to be.
And where's head office? Where's the where did it all start?
It all started with two guys and a credit card in London, England, and it remains there. Our co-founders are truly spectacular individuals and very much still involved in the business. I speak to them quite regularly, to be honest with you, and it still definitely feels like a startup, even though there's about 800 of us globally, 100 of which almost are sat here in Canada.
Wow. Big shop. Yeah. All right. So speaking of big shop, you guys just published a very timely study, The Pandemic Effect, What Holiday Shopping Will Look Like in 2021. Let's talk about that study. First of all, give us a sense of its scope, and to use scope twice in the same interview, but what was the objective of the study and what does it cover? And then we'll kind of start peeling back a few layers on what you found out.
Let's start like a generic overview, because the title does do a pretty good job of summing it up. But obviously the pandemic and lockdowns have altered, several aspects of people's lives. But with Canadians spending a lot more time at home, consequently and unsurprisingly, there's been a massive uptick in online shopping. But there's been a lot of other shifts in spending habits, and the study also delves a lot into that. We're aiming to help provide retail and CPG marketers a better understanding of Canadian shopping habits as we're heading into this crazy season where we're talking about shortages and logistical challenges of getting products in front of people. But the insights that we've highlighted in the study, Michael, really aren't just for the planning, activation, and measurement of the holiday rush season. They're truthfully meant to help act as a bit of a map or a guide towards the future of the retail space in particular.
And it's a great study. I'm just kind of paging through, and I've been paging through it for a couple of days. What are the kind of key observations that jumped out at you? By the way, we should tell the listeners that there's Canadian data in here too, which is not always the case. So it's a really it's a great perspective. That's great to see a global company also including Canadian data. So good for you guys.
It was so important to make sure that we got a Canadian lens on this, and it's great because with a sample size that was large enough, we were able to find like statistically relevant information for marketers to understand. Some of the things that are happening globally are definitely seeing those trends here locally in Canada. Mm-hmm. Or alternatively, we are seeing some nuances within the Canadian market, and there was a lot that got kind of uncovered. But I think to base it down to three key learnings that were uncovered in the report. I think the first was, for me at least, Michael, the gap between online and offline is shrinking, and why that divide is now closer than ever before. We really kind of like hammer that one home. And we just talked about the fact when we were talking about programmatic, everything is now becoming biddable. And as a result of that, that gap is closing. The second for me was how the holiday shopping timeline is shifting and what that means for media activation and campaigns. And then the last piece was to highlight to retail marketers the need to understand a little bit more about the inventory and channels to begin running their media campaigns to deliver that primary KPI for retail marketers that are all listening in here, which is really return on ad spend or return on investment.
Yeah, I mean, and we should probably tell the listeners, I guess we can put a link to this study in the show notes. Yeah, you can make it available to the people.
Absolutely. We will make sure that the study's available to everyone afterwards, as well as, hopefully hear from some folks around specific cuts with regards to their brands. I'm looking at the one thing, I mean, there's lots of things to dig into, but as you said about timing was really interesting. I think you guys did an amazing job. You go all the way back to 2016, and it's dramatic when you compare 2016 to 2020, or even practically 2019, right? I mean, if you look at a lot of retailers are looking at their year this year compared to 2019, because 2020 was a bit bonkers, right? Like it was just such an outlier. And you look at the shift between decision making that just arced up like a hockey stick in 2016 towards the end of December, and it just dives in 2019 and 2020. Like that's been just a huge shift. So I guess you must be getting calls a lot earlier and having meetings a lot earlier with your retail clients about, listen, you got to get in the game now, way earlier than even a few years ago, right? So that's a big call out from the study for sure. Massively. So we saw, the increase in that timeline that's required is like, we're getting people who are now starting that holiday shopping season or research at least in September, where historically it's been a Thanksgiving and post-Thanksgiving, that Black Friday kind of time frame. And even compared to me, at least, those people are well ahead of the game. That requirement is there really, Michael, because of the amount of research that people are now doing. Historically, people have been a little bit more compulsive with regards to their shopping habits and kind of gone out and not required that lead time. But we're now seeing people are being a little bit more fiscally responsible. They're doing a lot of that due diligence prior to that purchase. And this is giving marketers a good insight into when you need to be talking to them. Because historically, where you could have waited, now you've got to get in early enough to make sure they're even part of that consideration phase.
It's interesting to see Boxing Day in any survey. So I can tell that you were based in London, because that's a British thing. But I'm sure you've observed, and certainly retailers have observed, this shift over the last decade, notwithstanding COVID, where Black Friday and Cyber Monday has shifted this purchase earlier. I remember being in retail, Hudson's Bay, back in in the 2000s, and it was just a mad rush right at the 2 weeks before Christmas. But it feels like thanks to COVID, I think that's some unusual patterns, and people are kind of shopping earlier. I wonder if it's going to start going back the other way at some point. Where people, as you said, purchasing right now is very purposeful, right? I go online, I look, I probably don't want to linger too long in a store. Certainly last year, more so this year.
Yes.
I don't know. It feels like and it'll be interesting to see. It's not really, at this point, you should be asking, is there a question in there, Michael? It feels like this kind of impulse will come back in some way, shape, or another. Anyway, it's great. And again, for the listeners, it's a great and very dramatic chart to put up. The other thing that jumped out at me, one of the great, is the general observation, because it's a global study. I mean, I'm looking at data from Germany, Canada, UK, US, China, Australia, India, Singapore. It's not a lot of, it's actually not very different from country to country. Like there's some differences for sure when you get to Singapore and India, but a lot of the countries, like the changes in consumer behavior have been remarkably comparable around the world. And you as a big, global company must see that, right? So when you have discussions with your counterparts around the world, you go, yeah, we're seeing that too, right?
COVID definitely leveled a bit of that playing field. I think where historically we may have seen some differences or nuances. So I always think about our neighbors to the south and the importance of Black Friday and Cyber Monday and that U.S. Thanksgiving period. COVID kind of put us all back on the same page. It forced us all to be inside. It forced us all to move towards, probably a bit more of a focus on e-commerce. And as a result of that, I think what we'll see, Michael, the trend that we're seeing at least is the world is never going to go back to the way it was. E-commerce is now here. It needs to be considered. And, every retailer and marketer that I speak to is definitely, starting to think about the evolution of e-commerce, because e-commerce now isn't even what it was, when it started. There's, things like live commerce now and, influencer-based content. There's just so many different touch points in the space that I think what we'll see is the globe now will hit a bit of a reset. And I think you'll see that trajectory of us all kind of being on the same page a little bit more consistent going forward.
Let's talk about different advertising or marketing vehicles. So there's a great page, page 24, for anyone who might at this point have the study in front of them. And it lists the different, from print to social to email to word of mouth, TV commercials, shopping platforms, and online advertisements. And it's interesting. And this is where I really want to tap into your wisdom. I mean, the marketing mix, right, is changing. And what I thought was interesting, just as a jumping off point, was how strong TV commercials were. Like, TV's not dead at all. I mean, in some ways, it's comparable to social. Talk about how you think of this marketing mix. And we started the conversation by you saying, all the different media is being activated and programmatic and very sophisticated. So how do you think of the marketing mix when you talk to your clients, and what kind of questions are they asking you about it?
Yeah, we often get that question, like, is TV dead? And TV's not dead. It's changing. It's a natural evolution that it is destined to go through. And I think the way that we kind of approach the media mix is kind of tearing down the silos. So historically, the way, advertising campaigns have looked is you've had an out-of-home component, a radio component, a TV component, and a digital component. And they've kind of all done their own things. And, whether it is mass or very targeted, that doesn't have to be the case anymore. The case can be this, is like, you can utilize and understand a lot more about your television campaign. And then, you can begin to retarget households that have been exposed to your TV campaign. We actually offer a product at MIQ called Advanced Television. And we can actually understand through, something called ACR, or automated content recognition, ads that have been served to a specific household. And in that instance, we may not have to serve an ad to that home, or alternatively, we can now retarget them with digital ads. So you can't click on a TV commercial for a new T-shirt, but guess what? If I put the ad in your hand on a mobile device that you're probably utilizing while you're watching that TV spot, all of a sudden we have that ability to really kind of cross those boundaries and borders, and that is really like the evolution of media. It's not about silos anymore. It's tearing down those silos and just reaching consumers, like we kind of kicked the conversation off, Michael, right, the best time possible.
Wow. Like that's incredible, right? So that there's a technology that would detect what I'm watching on television or from a sampled group. Unpack that one just for a few minutes. Yeah, I'd love to. It is actually it is the fastest growing division of MIQ, but the media landscape in general. And it's called ACR. And it helps you detect, not from a sample size, but from a chip that lives inside of the hardware that you've got on your TV, exactly what content is being streamed. And it's not just being streamed over some of those, those connected channels like a Netflix or a Prime. It can also tell you if you're watching, the news at 6 p.m. or, bless them. I wish I could say a Jays game at this point. But they had a good run. Tough season. Didn't. It's tough to play in somebody else's stadium for an entire season.
It really is. I couldn't help but work it in there. That's what ACR data allows you to do. And we're helping marketers make the most of their TV budgets through the utilization of this tool. And it's going to be, I'm telling you right now, Michael, it's going to be the hottest product that we work with next year. If you think about some stats really quickly, eMarketer just released a report on their digital video saying that there's 27.7 million digital viewers in Canada in 2021. They didn't expect to hit that level for another 2.5 years until 2024. And concretely, we're seeing a bit of a decline on households that are paying to subscribe to TV. That's hitting the about 8 to 8.5 million marker at this point. So as we're getting that decline in traditional ways of consuming television, we're just augmenting that space with connected TV right now.
So fascinating. When we think about, and what occupies many minds today is the difference, or trying to begin to understand the difference between a reaction from consumers to unusual times, the COVID era, versus behaviors that are going to stick. You've touched on a couple of them. Does anything in the survey jump out at you as saying, and I think you've mentioned a couple of times we're not going backwards, but some uses I think would ebb and flow, and some are just going to be accelerated. As you think about, again, sitting down with your retail clients and saying, listen, as you think about this year, fine, but as we start to think about the year going forward, probably working on some budgets right now for 2022 and beyond, what are those kind of markers that say, listen, this isn't going to change, this has been moved forward, it's not going backwards, whether it's technology or user behavior that was accelerated? What are those kind of key things that retailers should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think is just embracing the e-commerce space. It requires a completely different strategy, if I'm being honest, Michael. If you're trying to get somebody into a brick and mortar store, which we are seeing there will still definitely be, a time and place for, you need to have a completely different strategy for your e-com versus driving people into store. And then, just the devices in which everything is being consumed. Historically, we've always built advertisements for a laptop or a desktop, but understanding the importance of mobile devices, if you look at some of the emerging markets that are well ahead of the Canadian trends, in Asia in particular, the penetration rates of mobile devices is so significant that we just can't help but not pay attention to what's happening there, and using it as a bit of a crystal ball and saying, listen, marketers, you need to embrace mobile. Every year as marketers, we always say it's the year of
We've been saying that for 20 years.
Yeah, 20 years. And it's coming on the 21st consecutive. It's going to run longer than MASH before you know it. It's definitely something that I think that we just need to take a little bit more of an understanding of. And then the impacts of, consumer privacy, like iOS 15, the way in which you track consumers. And a lot of that stuff just is going to change. Google announcing cookie lists, coming probably towards the end of 2022 into 2023.
And how is your industry reacting to all that? Because you're in some ways predicated on just understanding the user through all this data. Is there alternative ways to understand the user? Is that what's happening? Give us open the window on that one a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great question, Michael. There's a multitude of ways in which we're doing it. We've been doing it with some of our biggest retail clients, to be honest with you, is how do we identify some of the offline data sources that we can utilize to assure that once the deprecation of the cookie happens, once, the iOS stuff kind of begins to settle, is do we still have a large enough sample size, which we do, to make sure that we're tracking that and making sure that we're not missing out on anything. The primary focus for us as a business really is to assure that the results that we drive are not required to have cookies or app tracking, all of that stuff. Everything that we're doing right now foundationally is built on a cookieless environment with privacy first compliancy at the forefront. But still, primary objective number one is helping our partners, move their businesses ahead.
So all these changes, and for the listeners, when we talk about iOS changes, it's if you haven't experienced, if you're not on iOS, you now it provides you a challenge. Would you really like this app to share your data? And everybody's like, I didn't know it was sharing to begin with. So it's pretty important. But it sounds like what you're working on isn't going to pop back the industry to the stone age of hope. It's still going to be very data based and very results based. Yeah.
Yeah, extremely. And now is the best time to be testing. I always encourage our partners. We've got access to cookies and the ability to track a lot right now, and that's great. But the best time to prepare and plan for what's ahead is while we've got access to that still. So when that shift does change, and it will come, it's not this tectonic shift. It doesn't need to be a tectonic shift. We need to be doing the work right now to ensure that we're getting ahead of that. And some of the best marketers in the world, Michael, are doing it right now. We just had a really great case study that will be available on our website afterwards for the listeners with Dell Technologies about the utilization of cookieless tactics to assure that they were selling just as many computers and really focused on that return on ad spend target that they've got.
All right, right on. So last question on budgets and planning and all that stuff for next year. You talk about mobile. Is it a mobile first? Like, where do you start if you were sitting in the chair as you advise CMOs, is it a mobile first, start with mobile and then spend build your spend from there? Like where do you, if you had a blank sheet of paper in front of you and you had $1 to spend,
Sure.
Is mobile the first place you say, look, build your base from there? Is that what you're advising? Or is it more broad based on objectives?
Yeah, I would love to say I've got a definitive answer to that, but I will give a very generic answer. And really, to be honest with you, Mike, it depends on the marketer that we talk to.
Right.
When we talk to like some of our folks, like if awareness levels are really low, like it's TV, but like how do we be very concentrated or focused in television? If it's acquisition based, how does your landing page look? So there's a multitude of things, but I think the key trend that we need to focus on as an industry really is in the omni-channel space. And again, that's that tearing down of those silos and making sure that you're considering all of those available channels that are now available programmatically and can be executed through digital teams, and making sure that that's at the forefront, because we can be so much more targeted in the messaging. We can be extraordinarily targeted in delivering to specific types of consumers. I think that really needs to be the first piece. For the retailers and brands listening out there, I think we call it day zero planning at MIQ. Is like, we want to make sure that before you spend a penny on MMM or anything along those lines, that you've just got a good sense of the data that is available in the space, potentially not to you through first party data, but is accessible through partners like MIQ and other ones in the market that can help you just kind of guide those conversations.
All right. So interesting. Well, my guest is Jason Furlano. The company is MIQ, and the study is The Pandemic Effect, What Holiday Shopping Will Look Like in 2021. Again, I'll put a link to the study on your site in the show notes. And it sounds like there's lots of other great information. Where should people go? What do we point them to who are listening and may just want to just scurry there right now?
Sure. Yeah. The study will be made available at wearemiq.com. Alternatively, I'd be happy to get in touch with any of the listeners today. You can reach out to me directly. My email is jason@miqdigital.com. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to connect and make sure that, whether it's the study itself or you'd like to see a very specific cut for your brand or retail organization, we'd be happy to facilitate that.
No, that's great. And a reminder again to the listeners, there's Canadian data in there and global, so you compare and listen, it brings a lot of great knowledge and wisdom to the market. So Jason, thanks for being my guest on The Voice of Retail. It's a real treat chitting and chatting, talking about everything from programmatic to e-commerce to shopping. So kind of great highlight of the depth of your business and the fun that we're all having. So again, wish you continued success in what you're doing and helping us all figure this out. And thanks for joining me.
I appreciate you having me, Michael, and to the listeners for tuning in. I know it's a hectic time during Q4, but keep your heads up and we'll all get there together.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of The Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at emmyleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.